I'm really happy and honored to share this conversation with you and with the members of the ISC community who are joining us today. I really hope this panel inspires everyone watching to take action as artists and educators and culturally engaged folks around the idea and concept and issue of plastic pollution, whether it's in your studios, classrooms, galleries, museums, or other public spaces. I think most people don't realize that only about 9% of plastics are actually recycled. In fact, current estimates are even lower. Plastic particulates, are, known as microplastics, are being found in all of our water, bottle, tap, ocean, river, and even rain. And a common misconception is that it's only affecting marine life, which, it's devastating to marine life for sure, but it's actually killing land animals as well. Seabirds, avian life. Scientists are even discovering microplastics more recently in the cellulose of plants, and they're finding increasing quantities of microfibers in the air we breathe, in our bloodstreams, in the food chain, and perhaps most depressingly in human amniotic fluid. So we sculptors are in the business of arranging matter in new ways. And clearly we have a situation with this overabundance of a very problematic type of matter that's wreaking havoc on our beautiful planet. So while we're toiling away, creating and changing the cultural landscape every day, I ask that people consider what we're using as art supplies and how we can stretch our creative problem-solving muscles more while diversifying and building equity into the cultural landscape. I think it's fair to say that everybody is and should be invited to be a part of this, a part of shifting this terrible trajectory. So, I think, most of us think of these as art supplies, but obviously we have a lot of work ahead of us, and maybe we should think about what our art supplies are a little bit differently. So on that note, I'm really honored to introduce these 5 artists today who are doing incredible work of great cultural service around this issue. These particular artists are major inspirations to me personally, as I've been dedicated to exploring this problem in my own studio practice for the past 2 decades. The panelists I'm going to introduce you to are part of an ever-growing loose collective collaborative called Project Vortex. And to me, I see them as pioneers in solving this plastic pollution issue that we're all challenged with, and they do so through art. Their work varies in terms of how they engage in creative stewardship around plastic pollution. Some do it through storytelling, others through formal sculpting, and others through monumental architectural works. These artists and I will all be including our work in an upcoming exhibition at the School of Visual Art Gallery in New York City. It's entitled Reversing Trajectories, and it will be opening in New York City in August of 2023. And it will include a few other artists from this Project Vortex collective. So the first panelist I would like to introduce is a brilliant woman sculptor who's also a mother and an educator. Her name is Leticia Bajuyo, and she's based in Texas, the home of the American petroleum production. Leticia engages audiences and connects with communities through her site-specific installations that involve community collections of media and memories. Known for her shiny disc installation, art, as well as artificial turf mosaics, Leticia Bajuyo seeks opportunities to highlight stories that have been overlooked. A Filipinx American artist who lives, works, and teaches in Texas, Leticia is an interdisciplinary artist, object maker, and sculptor. Bajuyo received her MFA from the University of Texas, Knoxville, and her BFA from the University of Notre Dame. And in 2017, she joined the faculty at Texas A&M University, Corpus Christi, where she's an associate professor of sculpture. So that's Leticia's work. And then I'd like to introduce Tom Deininger. Tom Deininger is a critically acclaimed Rhode Island artist who works in a variety of mediums. He's most well known for his found object sculptures that combine his love for the natural world with his passion for painting and the diversity of everyday materials and pop culture. His work often addresses issues of mass consumerism, environmental issues, and what society values. He engages the viewer by highlighting a poetic resourcefulness and explores the potential that lies in the mundane. Deininger also admits that, that it serves as a healthy solution to his pack rat tendencies and his hunter-gatherer impulses that he's not been able to evolve past. He's also an artist, a surfer, a mountain biker, a kiteboard enthusiast, and he creates all this exquisite work. I mean, this is, you can't tell maybe, but from one perspective, it looks like this. And then from another, this is the exact same piece of art. While he maintains his own permaculture and animal rescue farm in Tiverton, Rhode Island. So that's Tom. And then there is Robin Frohardt. She is not predominantly a sculptor. Rather, she's a filmmaker and theater and filmmaker. Considering this tragic subtext that we're working with, Robin has found brilliant ways to instill a degree of tragic comedy and wry humor to this topic. I love this little plastic bag, for example. So her narrative-based work is mostly with film, puppetry, sculpture. She typically uses recognizable materials, often trash, to create richly detailed worlds that make magic of the mundane and highlight the trivialities of daily life. Her really well-known project, the Plastic Bag Store, is a public art installation and immersive film experience that uses puppetry, humor, craft, and a critical lens to question our culture of consumption and convenience, specifically the enduring side effects of single-use plastics. The Plastic Bag Store, I should mention one more thing. It premiered in Times Square in 2020. I got to go to the premiere, and it's toured to Los Angeles, Chicago, Australia, all over the world. She's currently working on a new film, short film about Home Depot parking lots. The next set of panelists are actually a couple with a young son who have been working together to create incredible massive installations and objects around the world that really defy notions around architecture and gravity. I'm so honored to introduce Jason Palmosky of StudioKCA, who with his wife founded StudioKCA. They're a design studio based in Brooklyn. And it's a group of architects, artists, lighting designers, and fabricators who spend their time and energy in pursuit of building meaningful objects and experiences for public spaces and events, with the hope that visitors are inspired to explore the world and have a positive impact on it. Their work ranges in scale and complexity, from large pavilions and sculptures to information kiosks, even tables, lamps, and chandeliers. They work collaboratively with clients and community leaders, and StudioKCA creates these incredible iconic pieces that respond to their site and program requirements in a thoughtful and provoking way. Many of their creations use materials in unconventional ways, engaging in nature, science, consumption, conservation, and community. And their work has been showcased in many international magazines, television programs, shown in 5 countries, 3 museums, and yeah, it's pretty mind-blowing in scale and ambition. And then the final panelist I'd like to introduce you to is a brilliant Canadian storyteller named Benjamin Van Wong. Ben is a multidisciplinary visual artist and activist who uses recycled and reclaimed materials to create striking work at the intersection of humanity's biggest issues, ranging from climate change to social justice. Leading from the principle that the world's largest issues are intertwined, Van Wong endeavors to create work with communities to help build more resilient ecosystems. His work often invites organizations and citizens to directly participate in the artistic process. His art has been viewed and shared hundreds of millions of times worldwide, has earned a reputation, and he has earned a reputation for sparking conversations around this issue in particular. He's exhibited at Art Basel, the San Francisco International Film Festival, the UN Environmental Assembly, among others, and has led social campaigns with corporations like Nike and Dell, and even holds a Guinness World Record for the most straws collected to build an installation. Along the way, he's been featured in a documentary narrated by Ryan Reynolds and has built a 40-foot tall installation that was the centerpiece at the United Nations in Nairobi when the Global Plastics Resolution was successfully signed. So yes, you guys are my heroes. I'm so grateful that you're all here with me today. So now I'd like to start asking you some questions, if I may. So I personally, as some of you may know, came to this material almost by accident about 20 years ago. The way it happened for me is I was really just enchanted by the nature of plastic debris as a sculpture material. And I was curious as to why more artists weren't exploring it, especially since it has archival integrity built into it, which is great for art, but terrible for the environment. So I'm curious, maybe I could start with you, Leticia. What led you to explore this material for art and design applications? Can you describe how you got started working with it? Was there like a specific moment for you where you were like, I'm gonna start playing with that stuff. I'm gonna use that for my work.
Certainly. Thank you, Aurora, for introducing all of our works and for bringing us together. Would it be cool, maybe stop screen sharing so we can all see each other as a gallery view?
Oh, cool.
Excellent. Thanks. It wasn't fully intentional. I was actually working with plastic water bottles before then. So I was seeing some of the other images that you shared and the work that I know through Project Vortex and your own work. It's definitely was the sort of a similar vein. I love seeing all of those, but I was collecting bottles and it wasn't working. But all these friends and community members were bringing bottles. And one of my colleagues at the school I was teaching at the time at Hanover College brought all these water bottles and a box of CDs that were like from old textbooks. You know, you used to get the textbook with the CD in the back of it. It was a whole bunch of those. And she brought them to me and was like, can you use these too? The closest place that we can recycle them is in Terre Haute, Indiana. And this is, I was teaching at Hanover, which is in southern Indiana at the time. And my favorite price is free. So I said yes. And I go back to work on the water bottle sculpture, but these shiny circles over on the side kept calling to me as I'm working on this other thing that's not working at the time. And so finally I picked them up. I was like, what do you mean? Right? And so I pull up these CDs, but I started doing just some basic research and development work, some R&D. What's the background of the CD? What's been the sort of like its trajectory that it's been on? And turns out the reason for Terre Haute, it's where Sony is based, its headquarters in the US is in Terre Haute, Indiana. And so I felt like one of the things as far as a silent voice I think about as being from the Midwest, growing up in sort of flyover states, is that some of those silent stories, cities and towns we just drive right by that don't get acknowledged, but also materials that often get left behind. And so trying to give the CD another view. I like to bring all of those memories, but all the people that are involved in the CD, the people who invented it, the engineers, the sound engineers behind it, like when I make one of those sculptures, I think of it as a quilt of all of the collective memory, both the analog and the digital, but all the people involved. And so that's how that all started. And that was 12 or 13 years ago was the first one of those. And now they keep showing up in my mailbox, which is great. I have hundreds of thousands of discs now. So the biggest problem at times is storage, because the line between a sculptor and a hoarder is kind of a acknowledged one.
It's a thin line.
Yes. But that's how the CD started for me.
That makes so much sense. Yeah. And that's beautiful. And I love how so many of your forms that you've created with the CDs have sort of an auditory look, they really speak to the ear canal, or thinking about listening to each other and listening to the planet, or listening to the issues that we have in terms of this consumption, this overconsumption, deluge.
And absolutely. And I always want more CDs. So if anybody watching happens to like have some that they're tired or they're embarrassed that they still have, or now you get a new vehicle and it doesn't have a CD player, I will take all of them and involve them in other future pieces. So keep sending them. I'll just keep adding on to those. But I definitely think of that auditory component. And sometimes there's actually theremin music instruments attached to those so that you can perform the sculpture. So the CDs take on another purpose as an actual horn for the performers in the space.
Nice. That's beautiful. What about you, Tom? Can you tell us your moment with plastic debris and how you got sent in this direction?
Yeah. So it's interesting. I was originally an observational realist painter, and that just digressed. I mean, the short answer is it's both conceptual and formal, in the sense that I was an observational painter, and that just kept breaking down towards abstraction. So around the time I had kind of run into Willem de Kooning and that, I was also going to the landfill, and I started seeing the world as a very abstract place. And I was building these combines that were non-representational by taking stuff I would find at the landfill, and they're sort of a lot like Rauschenberg at that point. And I also was always concerned about the environment and was trying to figure out how to work that into, from a conceptual level or content-wise, my realist paintings, and it was really wonky. And so I had traveled around the world surfing. I was in the South Pacific, and I was watching the stuff actually wash up on the beach, and I was seeing how consumer culture, American consumer culture, is being exported around the globe with these. It's single use, but and it just kind of got my attention. And so at first I was working very abstractly with found materials, most plastics, but a variety of other things. And then I decided to start doing mosaics, going back to representation, wall mosaics, and that way they could be kind of abstract and representational, and the concept, the social the thing could be was implicit in it, and that just kept one thing led to another, and now I'm mostly focused on wildlife, birds, and that's kind of it. It was a not a single moment. It was sort of a transition, and by the time I found myself exploring my more kind of mature work, I was not painting. I was painting daily as a matter of practice, but I was painting with the medium. And I just think to know the things around us, to kind of know ourselves. And so I think I wanted it helped in the sense that I was trying to do something both very traditional and very of the moment. And so the medium was very much the message that way.
I love that. To know the things around us is to know ourselves. That's really beautiful. I know recently someone reached out to me through Project Vortex asking if I wanted any of these small extra little toys, and I didn't need them, so we ended up sending them to you. Did you ever receive them?
I did two visits, and I filled my truck both times.
So would you like more toys, or would that be an item that, since Leticia is happy and willing and ready and able to accept more CDs?
Yeah, I like to use toys a lot because they come with this other way where you can really manipulate little narratives within the context of the sculptures, and they get quite satirical and violent and sexual and perverse, which is what I like to do. Is I like to turn these things on their head, because that's actually what we're doing to our children by giving them plastic toys. And so I'm kind of just pushing that thing along in a way that it's a little bit more direct. And so, I mean, these things really, we're doing it because we want to entertain our children, but we're undermining their future every time we do that. So
absolutely.
That's a thing too.
Well put. So how about you, Jason? What was you and Lesley, how did this happen for you? How did you start getting involved in the whole plastic pollution problem?
Well, we walk between the house and the studio in Brooklyn, and It's right about, it was a cloud basically that we did on Governor's Island. All of the trash bins between the house and the studio were stuffed with plastic bottles. And we started thinking about how many plastic bottles were actually used in general. And then we started to find numbers and figured out there was something like 57,000 bottles are used every hour just in New York City. And so when we had an opportunity to build a piece on Governor's Island, we thought, well, let's build something big enough that we can showcase how many plastic bottles are used in 1 hour in New York City. And that was really, and that's the cloud. So that thing is 40 foot by 20 foot by 25 foot. And it's 1 hour's worth of plastic bottle use in New York City. And then we went from there like that. And then everything gets bigger and bigger because the problem is so gigantic. So if you start looking at it, you know, the last couple of pieces with the whale is the biggest mammal in the water. There's 150 million tons, give or take, of plastic in the water now. So if you start to try to figure out how to equate the size and build something that illustrates that size, that has kept us going, making bigger and bigger things.
It seems really like the most appropriate thing to do sometimes is to try to make some sort of visual, like this, you know, our job as artists is to make something that can't be visualized visible, you know, especially if it's something that pertains to all living creatures. So, you know, these numbers are really hard for people to visualize. So when you create something of that scale, it really speaks with more integrity to the nature of the issue.
Yeah,
So,
but it started with those walks, I guess, back and forth and seeing all the crap.
taking a walk, you can learn all kinds of things.
That's right. That's right.
What
That's right.
about you, Robin? How did this happen for you with the plastic bag store and your dedication to this issue throughout your work in theater and film and puppetry and filmmaking? Oh, you're muted. We can't hear you.
Yeah, originally started, the plastic bag store is my first project that is specifically about plastic pollution, though I've always sort of been obsessed with trash and making things from trash, specifically cardboard. I worked with a group of artists in San Francisco and we called ourselves the Cardboard Institute of Technology, and we would make these massive installations. This is in the early 2000s. And then when I moved to New York, I started making narrative puppetry plays. And there is a scene in my play, The Pigeoning, in which the sea is flooded and all of the trash sort of becomes sea life. So there's like pizza box stingrays and to-go container clams and plastic bag jellyfish and all that. I think that sort of sparked a little bit of something about plastic, but I had just my experience also being in a grocery store and watching someone bag and double bag all my groceries that were already bags inside of boxes, inside of bags, inside of bags, inside of boxes. And I was kind of like, oh, this is like pretty funny, actually. Like, what if we, you know, had a grocery store that just sold packaging? So hence the plastic bag store, which was initially was just supposed to be an installation in which everything, an entire grocery store was made out of packaging and plastic bags. And then I ended up writing a play that fits inside of it. And so it's actually kind of this immersive puppet show as well inside of this fake grocery store.
Fantastic. I brought my daughters to Times Square, and it was just so enthralling and enjoyable and depressing at the same time. So, I mean, we were absolutely delighted and grateful, and I'm so excited that, you know, it's been traveling and you've been able to maintain, you know, keeping it going, because that, I know it's a tremendous amount of work.
Yeah.
What about you, Ben? How did you get, because I know you had a very robust career prior to engaging in this plastic pollution situation. How did it happen for you?
Yeah, I think my discovery of plastics kind of came a little more tangentially. I was a commercial photographer and I was looking for ways to do impactful things, and that was it. I'd just given myself 18 months to figure out how I could introduce social impact into my work. And I was looking for anything. I'd done a climate change project by going storm chasing. I decided to tie some models underwater with sharks swimming around for shark conservation. And then my mom discovered this mermaid tail designer. And I was like, oh, I need an excuse to work with this mermaid designer. So like, mermaids live in the ocean. What are some ocean issues that I can pay attention to? And this was right at the time that the Great Pacific Garbage Patch had just been discovered. And so I was like, oh, let me learn more about this problem. And then it just became sort of the first of many, many projects to take place. I think, like, as with most issues in the world, we know that they exist, but we kind of turn away because they're inconvenient to pay attention to. And this was a time, I guess, in my life where I was like, oh, let's look for problems and find different ways of representing them. For me, I see art as a tool. I'm not really an artist for the sake of creating. I don't care so much about creating. I care about finding ways that it can be leveraged to create change. And so I'm always trying to infiltrate different spaces and places where I don't belong in order to find ways that the art can actually make a difference. And so I think my art installations are actually less interesting in person and a lot more interesting in photo or video, because the journey of how we get there is almost more important than the pieces themselves, at least how I've prioritized it. Or it's really just an excuse for being lazy and not having enough resources to do something I really
Please
want to
be
do.
kind to yourself, Ben. You're doing amazing things, please. Okay, well, that all is totally, I think it's all totally valid. And the journey is obviously tantamount for all of us. Speaking of which, I guess my second question is, for me, and I think Tom and I have some similar feelings about this. One of the hardest parts in my practice, daily working with other people's garbage, is navigating through like a lot of ignorance, laziness, greed, hypocrisy around the issue, and also how to come to terms with the biases that people have about this material and whether or not, they think of something as valuable when it's made out of garbage, and plus storage. Those are probably my two biggest challenges in my studio practice. So I'm wondering, I think, Ben, you don't have the storage issue. Which is, so maybe this question isn't really as directed to you, but I'd love to know how, for example, Jason, how does StudioKCA manage when one of these mammoth installations is no longer on view somewhere? How do you handle storage, and what is your biggest gripe, maybe?
Well, cleaning is always an issue. It takes a long time to clean that much plastic, especially if we're cleaning it in the winter because we're using power washers. That's a real pain. Storing it is tough. We've got a space upstate that we build it with. The piece that we did in Bruges that was like 40 or 50 feet tall was 5 tons. We built that so it can break apart and ship tight in shipping containers. So there's some opportunity there to kind of limit the amount of waste. And if it's always moving, it's never sitting. And if it packs very, very tight, you keep a small footprint. And then that's been the workaround. The other one, we started building things in the country or the state that we have a piece to build in. So like the one in Kaohsiung in Taiwan, we went to Taiwan and stayed there for 3 months and built it right across the street. So we didn't have to really worry about storing 15 tons of plastic waste from the ocean in any given, anywhere here in the United States, I guess. We don't really have a good answer. It's a pain, but process.
Yeah, for sure. What about you, Robin? What would you say is the hardest part of this for you?
Well, initially, storage. And when I first started making the store, deciding what goes in it, and then feeling like once I started to save plastic for the store and collect items, I started to feel like kind of responsible for all of the plastic that crossed my path in every way, and that I was supposed to find some sort of like use for it in the store. And if I didn't, I felt bad. I haven't moved on from that feeling, but initially I felt like, every time I like passed something on the street or a bag of something, I felt like I have to take this. It's for the store. Or like, Yeah. And so fortunately now that the plastic bag store is like a touring production, it exists in its own shipping container that is no longer in my space.
You're not allowed. No more touching. What about you, Leticia? Do you have like a hardest part of this for you?
Yeah, I think the same issue with storage. All of the pieces I keep, they collapse back down. And so the exoskeleton, sometimes that I recycle that into other things. So like the wood versions where it's a wood skeleton form, those have become other sculptures, or I donate it to my students to make other pieces out of. But all the CDs and DVDs I collect. And so that one image that you had shared where there's like that small sculpture, whenever I'm building one of the big installations, I'll break hundreds, if not thousands in a moment, in a day. And so I collect even those little fragments and I collage those together into smaller 6-inch, 7-inch tall. They're like this size, like little bite-sized sculptures. And I think I'm sometimes funny. And so I look for like little texts that crack me up. And so like that one that was on the screen is titled "You Can't Hurry Love" because it was an album that had that text on it. So I like very carefully will cut and hope that I can save it. And then those get all welded together and adhered together in different types. And so then I have leftovers of those. So then those get disintegrated further. And so I have boxes of like fragments, and then there's like fragments. So they're all labeled fragments. And so
I have very similar issues in my studio, and I'll end up taking fragments from pieces and making other pieces out of those as well. I kind of love the idea of doing an exhibition of the fragments of the fragments. Perhaps that's something we can arrange in the future.
That would be cool.
Yeah, for sure. What about you, Tom? Is there like one thing that stands out in your mind that you're like, oh, this is the hardest part for me?
Yeah. So at one point, I was making the work much larger, and it was thicker. I mean, some of the walls were like 40 feet and they were coming out 2 feet deep. And the studio's rent just became too expensive. And I mean, of course, I was freezing in the winter as well because I couldn't heat that space. And so it became, I decided I had to become a little bit more intimate, and still, you build to your environment. I almost feel like I'm doing that, and we do that collectively as a world. And I do that personally in my studio. So sorting and storage is you want to take everything. You want to love all of it, use all of it, but you just can't. So that's always been an issue, but do the best you can. And when I downscaled, one of the most disheartening things was taking all the stuff I had been storing for some of the stuff 15 years and throwing it into dumpsters just to go to the landfill anyways,
Oh, yeah.
But what lasts forever, right? And that's what I told myself. That's how I got through that day, right?
Yeah, it's so funny because I think if you're not working with this material in a serious way, nobody can understand, right?
Yeah.
So it's a very specific kind of focus that presents a very specific set of problems. So it's really great to hear, that I'm not alone for one. So do you ever feel, I guess my next question is, as the human population increases more and more virgin plastic is being created, it seems increasingly relevant to me to work to try to localize and use this material for art and design applications where it can be sequestered and do no more harm to all the life on Earth, right? So I'm driven every day in this way, but I'm wondering if any of you ever feel conflicted about working with plastic debris, and if so, would you be willing to explain this conflict? It's kind of a strange question, but I'm curious if you feel any conflict about it at this point in your practices.
I have a story I could share. A couple of the images you shared at the beginning were of my newest AstroTurf or artificial grass pieces. So I've been working with an artificial grass company in town here when I'm in Corpus Christi. It's the Island Artificial Turf Company. And when they finish doing any sort of space, say a new park or a new home or something, a yard, I get all the remnants. And so I don't want it to go someplace else. It's not going to the dumpster. Then I get to salvage it. But then I recognize like at some point I'm also like advertising and encouraging, but then it's like this dialogue also about like water use and yard upkeep. And so it's a larger, for me, it's a more of a commentary and an inquiry about expectation of like yard keeping and the American dream. And trying to like contain nature in this perfect controllable manner. And so there's a couple of other components within cultural capital I think about, but to do it with that right material, I have all of this plastic turf that shows up in my house and freaks my neighbors out sometimes. They think I'm gonna like astroturf my whole home.
So you feel conflicted about working with it because it presents a whole set of different problems, and it also, it's technically virgin material. It's just waste virgin material. Even more horrifying. But sometimes this will happen to me as well, where I'll receive a bunch of cast-offs that haven't even been, like it's a gift because I don't have to go through the process Jason was mentioning of having to clean it and get the labels off and get it even prepared to sculpt with. But at the same time, it sort of starts to feel dirty, even though it's cleaner, right? What were you going to say, Robin? You had your hand up. I'm curious. Did you have
Well, I definitely feel like conflicted about, I do a lot of like cutting and taping and gluing and melting and heat gunning. And so I worry about, my long-term exposure to stuff chemical wise.
Yeah, that's sure valid. I would love to show you if you ever want to come by the studio. I have some techniques where you wouldn't have to use anything that would be dangerous to you.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
We'll make a date with a plan. So that's actually a huge concern. Did you want to say something, Tom? I saw you.
I did. I just have this very peculiar, it's a love-hate relationship with the material itself. I mean, the diversity of what we make and plastic in general. I mean, it's a testament to how creative we are as a species. I mean, we make every quality. It's translucent. I mean, it is a really beautiful, effective material, and it's incredibly diverse. I look at all the different toys that are made and all that, and it's like, so on the one hand, it's like a celebration, and the other hand, it's a condemnation. It's like it's this amazing problem that an amazing species created. We know about it. We're trying to, you'd think we would want to address it in a way that was a little more serious, but how do we all go back to wood tools now? When you can make something amazingly intricate for 10 cents, with multitude of colors, and it can, and it's dexterous and you can move it. And it's like, I look at these little action figures and they're all little sculptures and they're all amazing. And behind each one of those is a whole, pathway, probably 12, 15 creative types, chemists and toy makers. And it's beautiful and depressing. And I'm just totally conflicted. It drives me crazy.
Hence the amazing artwork, I suppose. I think we all feel a sense of that conflict, and that's part of probably what draws us to engage in this material. Was there something you wanted to mention on this, Jason or Ben? Do either of you have strong conflict feelings you want to share around it? Or
yeah, I mean, I could agree with that, just because I have to have certain colors and a variety of colors to make a grocery store environment. So I'm very attracted to certain plastic bag colors, and I can't just buy them new. I have to collect them. So, if I see a plastic bag, that's a really interesting color, I'm really drawn to it, and it feels very special to me. So yeah.
So with the plastic bag store theoretically being a finished piece that you're not allowed to add any more to, or you're saying you're not going
constantly adding.
So would you like bags?
Always taking
colors of bags.
Always taking colors, not just any bag, but
any. So I think hopefully the chat people
sure.
can communicate or reach out, and I
Reds,
can help
yellows, greens.
facilitate some
Yeah.
of the requests for specific types of plastic debris. Okay. So, you know, one of my favorite quotes that I want to share with you is from the author Rebecca Solnit. And her quote that I love that helps me every day is, "Despair is a form of certainty." She said this. And I think we probably all agree that certainty is a form of arrogance, right? So this quote helps keep me rationally optimistic pretty much every day. I keep it posted in my studio, you know, and it gives me like the ability to persevere, because sometimes it can just be overwhelming and depressing. And then I also get a lot of joy from secretly stalking you guys and the other Project Vortex artists and other artists around the world, and architects and designers who I discover all the time doing interesting work with this material. And that speaks to me of the poetic, crystalline nature of this problem. And it gives me, and when I say crystalline nature, I mean, it's like a crystal. It has so many facets to it that any entree for engagement is a valid one. Any entree for engagement is useful, and it's welcome, right? It's just any way you approach it is a good one. So so that keeps me positively engaged somewhat. I'm wondering, with plastic pollution being such a big, dark, potentially depressing problem, if you can share what gives you guys hope or helps you maintain a sense of humor around this issue. Anyone? I know this is a hard question. Ben, you're smiling. Tell me you have something hopeful to share.
I'm laughing at the silence.
Oh.
Like, where do you get your hope?
Well, maybe just using despair as a form of certainty will help all of us then.
No, I mean, I think, you know, as with, what is it, like, if we're in the dark, like a single candle can fight the darkness or whatever it is, it's like, you know, on one hand, like everywhere you look where there is shitty things happening, you have wonderful people who are doing something to fight against it. And while it may feel overwhelming, you know, we have 9 billion tons of plastic produced since the beginning of time, and every year it gets more and more and more, there's an equal amount of resistance that's slowly and surely building. And so maybe if we take a scientific look at things, social movements take about a decade to kind of unfold, whether it's civil rights or, you know, getting smoking bans and so forth. And now we're like, over the last decade, the amount of action that is being taken at all levels, from the corporate to the political, to just the amount of awareness that's being, that's happening, like, despite the occasional setbacks like the pandemic, which created, you know, an increase in single-use plastic production, there are really exciting things that are happening at the systemic level. I mean, when the United Nations comes together with 193 different countries to say that they're going to come and build a global plastics resolution to create a legally binding treaty that's also going to provide financing for countries that are poorer, and that has to happen within the next like 3 to 5 years, or something that's really interesting about the amount of momentum that this is creating. And like at these conferences where you see that like the Pepsis, the Coca-Colas, and the Nestle's have a presence, and they're actually rooting for it too, because they need everyone to even out the competitive advantage that virgin plastics currently offers over recycled materials. You know, we are progressing, and we are moving towards really interesting and exciting solutions. So that change is happening. And so I think we just need to remember that if you're an activist, for most of the life of an activist, you're losing. Otherwise, you wouldn't have a job. There would be no purpose to your existence, right? Like, and so I think we kind of need to hold those two realities, that yes, things suck, and yes, it feels really hopeless from time to time. But on the other hand, there's also change that is happening, and we just sometimes can't see it right here, right now, and to kind of take a step back and look at all the progress that's happened in that time frame.
Thank you. That was nice to hear, for sure. I'm sure everybody appreciated that insight big time.
Yeah.
I think, oh, go ahead.
I really like that insight. And on the face of it, you think like, oh, what's my little project doing? What's my stupid little sculpture doing, you know? And, you know, in a practical sense, nothing. But it all does contribute to the overall zeitgeist, you know. It's people, if they do go to an art museum and they see a work that's made like this, oh, it's here too. It's, and it doesn't, every little piece allows for that thing to be hammered home and become more of a presence. So it's my contribution, nothing, but it's a drop in a growing zeitgeist, as I said.
For me, something that gives me hope and keeps me going, and I really appreciate that description. Thank you, Ben, and thank you, Tom. In a small way, I think about the stories. Like whenever I get collections from people, it often then comes with the story of their collection, their past. Sometimes it's hidden, like I have to guess because like there'll be big collection bins that museums will put up for me. But in other cases, somebody specific will donate, and then I'll get their whole story behind who it was or why they collected it. And then my favorite little stories would be like somebody's like one of my favorite like little CD sections I had was somebody cleaned out the bottom of their car under their floorboards, and they found Love Mix 98 and Breakup Mix 99. And they were so scratched from being like, like ran over by their seat, they wouldn't play. But by bringing those to me and then sharing that story, they were remembering all of the songs. They knew every song on there, even if they couldn't hear it, because there was a moment. And so I think that for me, it's a way to keep reflecting back, because we're such a fickle society, and plastic allows us to be that socially fickle with what we want versus then we discard. And for me, it becomes metaphors for people, metaphors for inclusion. And so like, what is it that we want to make sure that we keep at the table and keep reflecting back rather than just discarding and ignoring? And so I love all of the stories that come with the donations. That keeps me hopeful.
I love that. That's beautiful. Yeah, I mean, for me, it also helps when people send me certain types of plastic debris. I had like sometimes kids will send me things. They'll get their mothers to find my address and be like sending little things, little bits of ephemera. And it's a beautiful and painful responsibility to fall into these kinds of shoes. Okay, so I think I have to wrap it up sort of soon because we want to make sure we have time for questions. So I have one last question that I'm going to try to get some answers from you guys. Personally, when I began exploring plastic pollution for my own work, I was terrible. I drank from single-use disposable water bottles. I ate with plastic utensils. I didn't have my own reusable tote bag or even think about my own plastic footprint. It was not on my radar when I started. And now I'm a mother of 2 children. I strive to reduce like anything I can that's made out of plastic, virgin plastic in my life. And I also try to encourage my friends and family to do that, which is not always easy, personally. And I mean, habits are really difficult to break for people. So, every day I'm kind of like working to transform my studio into a zero waste plastic pollution studio. And I'm dreaming of making all my tools solar powered and trying to like work towards that. So I kind of feel like I'm, it's changed me as an individual, not just as a sculptor, not just as a mother, not just, just like it's completely changed me, my engagement. So how has working with plastic pollution changed you as a person, if at all? It's a tough question, maybe. And it's okay, no judgment. I'm just curious.
I would say in the same way, the more of that stuff that you see, the less you want it involved in your own life. And the easiest way to affect any changes is to do it personally. You can control your own habits. So, I mean, that's pretty much what we've done in our family and in our studio. I mean, there's so many different ways to solve not using single-use plastics or looking for ways to eat meals where you're not, throwing away the dish that it came in. And I'd like to say it started happening before the first piece we ever did, but it really picked up steam when we started kind of exploring the size and scale and scope of plastic everywhere in the world and in the air and the water. You can't help be affected by the materials that you use use regularly. So it's easy to control this. Everything else gets a little bit harder. So
yeah, for sure.
I find the irony is that when I do the plastic bag store, I'm often we've been touring with it. And so we're like traveling, touring, and working extremely long hours, and those make it's actually harder to not use single-use plastic while working on the plastic bag store than when I'm not working on the plastic bag store. At home, it's easy, but on the road, it's like this whole other. So I always think that's kind of ironic.
Yeah, I feel that. I also know, there's a lot of trappings in the art world when you're shipping sculpture, and then you think about your footprint, and and then you go and you have an exhibition reception, and somebody offers you a plastic water bottle or a meal with plastic utensils, and they're trying to take care of you and give you nutrition and hydration, and it's like there's some sort of disconnect happens. I mean, is that something that you guys all struggle with, and if so, how do you navigate that one?
People have been pretty good about it when we're on the road. At least people who have hosted us have made an extra effort, but I think they'll make an extra effort for us, but maybe not for the next company that comes touring through. Who knows?
We're those people.
People are self-conscious about it when they're around us, even though we do not police people, because I hate plastic, but also not a fan of the cops. So I'm not interested in being anybody's cop or anybody's lecturing people, because I think at least with the plastic bag store and the story that we tell and the whole experience, it's not about you shouldn't use water bottles. It's a much deeper story that we're trying to tell. And I think that sometimes simplifying it to just people's personal choices in the moment can really at least for us kind of take the wind out of this other sail that we're trying to blow, that it's much deeper than that. It's more, the story goes from the ancient past to the present day to the far off future, and we're trying to tell this epic tale about the things that we're leaving behind and how they connect us all together. And so often just the message of at the very least, you come to the plastic bag store, I'm sure next time you go to a grocery store, you'll be thinking about the plastic bag store. But I try not to get too caught up in the who's having a water bottle or not. I try to, people bring plastic water bottles to the show, and then I see them kind of trying to hide them. And I'm no, it does, we're all in it together. It's not I don't claim any level of purity, and this is not a zero waste project. We shipped this shit all over the world. Y'all drove here in cars. I think I'm trying to think about it in a different way. Obviously that stuff is important, but I think I don't want to shame people or make them feel guilty it's all their fault necessarily. It's we're all kind of in it together.
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, that's a thing that has happened to me, where I'll show up somewhere and people will start hiding their plastic, and I think shaming is absolutely the wrong approach. 100%. And I think a big part of it is how we think about hierarchy. And we think about these things as more valuable or less valuable, or shaming, or putting people on different levels. And I don't think a person would realistically engage in working with plastic pollution if they were really focusing on hierarchies like that. So that's sort of some kind of disconnect that a lot of audiences tend to have. And I think it's usually very well intended. Anyway, so I think it's almost 4 o'clock, and I'm sad because I have a few more questions I wanted to ask, but I want to make sure that other people have a chance to ask some of you amazing artists some questions. So Gina, thank you so much for hosting us at the International Sculpture Center. It's been really a gift to be able to have this conversation, and I hope it's been informative. And
absolutely, thank you all very much. And for the attendees, if you want to, you can feel free to unmute yourself. If you have a question, you can raise your hand, or you can put it in the chat. There was an earlier question about, Aurora, your techniques for safely working with plastics.
Yes.
If you want to offer some of that. And I will mention that, as Ben pointed out, some of that is in Aurora's workshop video, which will remain active after this. Also, it's included on the website. But if you just want to talk briefly about that as well.
I would be happy to. So let's see, for the past couple of decades, I've used a number of techniques for attaching and manipulating the material. initially, like probably most people, I played around with adhesives and toxic ways of working with it. And I just decided that was a terrible idea. I would like to not become, not develop cancer. I don't want to pull an Eva Hess on anyone. I'm not interested, especially as a mother. So one of the techniques that, the technique I use in the workshop requires no hand tools other than a pair of pliers, a pair of specific snips, and an X-Acto blade. Very simple, no hardware. But some of the other techniques that I find work really well are, and might be applicable for bags in particular, would be using like an industrial sewing machine, works tremendously well, as well as you can use an ultrasonic welder, which has 0 fumes whatsoever. It's a rather expensive tool, but they do make less expensive versions of it, and it creates like a spot weld so that you can just quickly connect things, no fumes whatsoever. I'd be happy to share more information on any of these tools, though I think they are highlighted on the video. For thicker gauge materials, there's an injection welder that's made by Moderator that I use all the time that works much like a MIG welder meets a hot glue gun. So it can create very structurally strong welds between thicker gauge and even thinner gauge materials, as long as they're the same chemical composition. And what else do I recommend? Hardware like a copper rivet tool works tremendously well for attaching all kinds of materials together, but then you have this added metal hardware. So I've been, gradually working towards ways to reduce anything virgin or extra in the artwork. Right now, I'm actually transitioning in my studio to working with a Philibot, which allows me to take the scraps that are too small, the scraps that are too small to make fragmented pieces with, and turn those into filament that can then be either 3D printed or used with the injection welder. So these are some of the techniques I recommend. And what's beautiful about the welding is that you would only melt the material to its, or heat the material to its melting temperature, not beyond it. If you burn it, it will release the fumes, which are toxic. But if you just melt it, especially with high density polyethylene, it's perfectly safe. Hopefully that's helpful. And, we can take more of that offline because I don't want to, I can go on for days about techniques for working with plastic.
Are there any other questions from anybody here or any of the panelists to each other? You could also throw something in if you were wondering something.
It's not necessarily a question for the panel, but we have people on the who've joined us today. Is anyone else in this room, in the Zoom room, also an artist that works with plastic or with the environment that you would like to share?
I just see one in the chat.
Yeah.
Or the chat.
Adrian?
Sure, I'd love to. I'm just thrilled to be here. I've been working with plastic strapping most recently, and it's just such incredibly durable stuff, which brings in that archival thing. It's never going away, and the volume of it is just daunting. So I'm thrilled to hear about that welding idea, because I was looking at the material, the guns they use to melt it together to begin with. They're $5,000, and I'm curious if you've worked with that material ever, and if this works.
It is a fantastic material, and it works tremendously well for ultrasonic welding. That would be the technique I would use for it. And I think there's an image on the ISC Instagram, or it's also on my Instagram, that shows a helmet made into a hat that I
saw that.
That's all that same material. I love working with that material. I'd love to see what you do.
Thank you. Well,
I'm actually forever building out this Project Vortex collective, and trying to add people as frequently as I can around my own practice, just because it's so inspiring. And I also love to be able to, like, there's a company that's been sending me their cable straps of those types, but I can't process all of them, so I'm happy to share, if there's other artists working specifically with them. But if you want to reach out to me separately, I can send you the model of the
that would be great.
And
that would be great.
You will be so happy it works. And what's interesting about those cable straps too is they come in a bunch of different chemical compositions, and it works for all of them.
Oh wow, excellent. Well, thank you. I have lots of enthusiasm, because that's been a problem I had recently, and I'm thrilled to have an answer. So thank you. And thanks to all of you. Your contribution has been amazing.
Thank you. Miguel has some artwork. It's a, did anyone here do the workshop by any chance and have an image they want to share? Or want to see the finished little piece that I made?
Looks like Chloe, do you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on just the general sense of it all. So I'm a sustainability student at University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point, and my art professor, who I'm interning under right now, we've been working on a Catching a Wave project, which is just bringing ocean health awareness to the public with collaborating artists and coastal scientists. And I just want to thank you all. It's very, very inspiring to hear from all of you and be in the same room with how humble you all are, even though you're so influential and you may never see that reaction, whether it's speaking at an event and you say one thing and that could influence a young artist like me for the trajectory of the rest of their life. So thank you. I appreciate all your time. That's all I want to say.
Thank you, Chloe.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I think we're about 5 minutes after. So I just want to thank our panelists again. I want to thank everybody for attending today. This, as I said, this is the pre-recorded workshop, and the recording of this session will be available. I'll also send out any contact information if the artists want that, and any other resource information I'll include in that follow-up email as well. Our next encounter is on May 12th, which you guys can all find on your agenda. And I am also going to plug next Saturday is International Sculpture Day. You can register on the ISC website, or you can just share on social media using #IsDay. We are also hosting our 60th anniversary event in New Jersey. All of this information can be found on the ISC calendar. So I just want to thank you all again so much. This was fabulous. And I hope you all have a super productive Earth Day.
Thank you,
So-
you as well. I will post images of the completed piece on my Instagram.
Perfect. Thanks, Aurora.
All right, take care, everyone. Be well.
Bye, everyone.